house dies twice. The first time is when the last person who called it home takes their final breath. The second is the silence that follows. For 52 years, this house in Maple Creek had been a living thing, breathing with the rhythm of Elizabeth and Robert's life. Now it was just a collection of rooms holding the scent of lilies from the funeral, and a quiet so profound it felt like a pressure against her eardrums. 78 years old, and Elizabeth had never felt silence like this. Not a peaceful quiet, but a hollow, echoing void where a life used to be. She stood at the living room window, her reflection a pale ghost against the darkening lawn. The last of the mourners' cars, black and solemn, had finally disappeared down the tree-lined street. They had come. They had offered their condolences in hushed, awkward tones. They had eaten the sad little sandwiches, and they had left her with the silence. All of them, except two. From the kitchen she could hear the low, sharp murmur of voices. Her son Jacob and his wife Chloe. Their voices weren't soft with grief. They were clipped and strategic. The sound of a business meeting, not a family in mourning. Elizabeth's grief was a vast grey fog, and through it their voices were like the glint of something sharp and metallic. A moment later, Chloe appeared in the doorway to the living room, a vision of curated sympathy. Her black dress was couture, her blonde hair pulled back in a chignon so severe it seemed to defy gravity and emotion. Not a single strand was out of place. She glided across the Persian rug, her heels silent, and enveloped Elizabeth in a hug that was both cool and cloying, smelling faintly of expensive perfume and ambition. "Oh, Elizabeth, you poor, poor thing," Chloe murmured, her voice a masterclass in feigned empathy. "It's just awful. We can't imagine what you're going through." Elizabeth didn't respond. She just stood there, a small, frail-looking woman lost in the cavernous space of her own home. She felt like a piece of furniture they were assessing. Chloe pulled back her perfectly manicured hands, still resting on Elizabeth's shoulders. Her eyes, a pale, calculating blue, scanned the room before settling back on her. "Jacob and I were just talking. This house, it's so much. The upkeep, the memories. It must be overwhelming for you, right now. All alone." Jacob emerged from the kitchen, holding 2 mugs of what was probably tea. He had Robert's height, but none of his father's easy warmth. He was perpetually tense, a man who seemed to be bracing for a blow that never came, or perhaps one that was long overdue. He avoided his mother's gaze, focusing on the mugs, as if they held the secrets of the universe. "We were thinking," Chloe continued, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper, "that maybe we could help. Take some of the burden off your shoulders. We could start with Robert's things. It might be easier for you if we just handled it." The word help hung in the air, weighted and ugly. The offer wasn't kind, it was strategic. They wanted to tidy away her life with Robert, box it up, and get it out of the way. Numbness was a strange mercy. It allowed Elizabeth to nod a slow, mechanical gesture. The fog was too thick. She couldn't fight. She didn't have the energy to care what they did with his old suits or his collection of history books. That would be helpful, she heard herself say. The words were not her own. They belonged to the grieving widow everyone expected her to be. They started that evening, their movements efficient and dispassionate. They were less like a grieving son and daughter-in-law, and more like an estate-clearing crew. Elizabeth retreated to her bedroom, the one she had shared with Robert, since they'd bought the house, as optimistic newlyweds. She closed the door, but she could still hear the rustle of plastic bags, the clink of objects being sorted into piles of keep and discard. Mostly discard. Sleep wouldn't come. Grief was a restless companion. Hours bled into one another in the dark. The moon cast long shadows across the floorboards. Around 2 a.m, a strange primal instinct pulled her from the bed. It wasn't a thought, but a physical compulsion, an itch under her skin. Her feet carried her across the cold floor to the antique mahogany dresser. On its surface sat her jewellery box, a gift from Robert on their 10th anniversary. Its lid was inlaid with mother of pearl. Her fingers, gnarled with age but still steady, traced the familiar pattern before lifting the lid. The little ballerina inside remained. Still her music box, silent for years. Elizabeth's own wedding band and engagement ring rested in their velvet slots. Beside them, there had always been a third, Robert's wedding ring. He'd lost weight in his final years, and the ring had become too loose, so she had insisted on keeping it safe for him right next to hers. A silent promise, a connection. She looked into the box. The worn, deep blue velvet slot where Robert's ring should have been was empty. It wasn't just empty, it was a void. A black hole in the center of her universe. The sight was so stark, so brutally wrong, that for a moment her mind refused to process it. She stared her heart, a cold, still stone in her chest. Then the stone shattered. A dread so cold and so sharp it felt like a shard of ice being driven through her sternum, cut through the thick fog of grief. The sadness, the sorrow, the weight of her loss, it all evaporated, burned away by this new terrifying clarity. The silence in the house was no longer about loss. It was about theft. The night offered no sleep, only a cold, hard certainty that settled deep in her bones. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Chloe's saccharine offer to help. The word was a mockery now. By the time the first grey light of dawn filtered through the blinds, the grief had been replaced by something else. Something harder, something colder, a quiet, simmering rage. She waited until she heard them in the kitchen, the clink of coffee cups, the murmur of their voices. She walked, in her old silk robe pulled tight around her. They looked up, their faces arranged in masks of gentle concern. Chloe was scrolling through something on her phone, a sleek rose gold device that looked alien in the cozy, slightly dated kitchen. "Mum, you're up early," Jacob said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" Elizabeth ignored the question. She stood in the doorway, her small frame radiating an intensity that made them both pause. Her voice, when it came, was not loud or hysterical. It was quiet level and held the chilling weight of absolute conviction. "Where is it?" Jacob blinked. "Where is what, Mom?" "Robert's ring," she said. "His wedding ring. It was in my jewelry box last night. Now it's gone." She watched them. She saw it. A flicker. A split second of pure animal panic in their eyes before the masks slammed back into place. It was a shared glance, a micro-expression of guilt so clear, it was like a signed confession. Then came the performance. Jacob stood up and walked over to her, his movements a little too slow, a little too deliberate. He reached out to pat her hand, a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but felt deeply patronizing. "Mom, are you sure you've been under so much stress? You're exhausted." Chloe set her phone down her face, a canvas of practiced worry. "Elizabeth, sweetie, maybe you put it somewhere safe and just forgot. Grief does the strangest things to the memory. It can make us confused, forgetful." The gaslighting was so smooth, so immediate. It was clear they had rehearsed it. They weren't just liars, they were professionals. They were treating her mind as the scene of the crime, trying to convince her she was an unreliable witness to her own life. "I did not forget Elizabeth," said her voice, dropping even lower. "It was there. Now it is not." They saw that this line of attack wasn't working, so they pivoted. It was seamless. Chloe came to stand beside Jacob, forming a united front. She placed a hand on Elizabeth's other arm. "You know, Jacob and I have been so worried." Chloe began, her tone shifting from concern to something more therapeutic. "This big old house. It's really too much for you to manage on your own. All the stairs, the garden. We were looking into a place, actually. Just looking. A lovely community over in Oak Haven. It's more of a modern residential suite. State of the art. They have activities, a wonderful dining hall, 24-hour nursing staff." The words washed over Elizabeth, each one a calculated blow. A lovely community. A modern suite. They were painting a picture of a gilded cage. Jacob picked up the thread, his voice earnest. "And financially, Mom, it would be the smart move. We could sell the house. The market is incredible right now. It would set you up, secure your financial future completely. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing ever again." And there it was, the end game. It wasn't just about a ring. The ring was just the seed money. The real prize was the house, the culmination of a lifetime of work, of love, of memories. They weren't suggesting it. They were informing her of her future, a future they had designed for her in which she was a docile memory, addled old woman safely tucked away while they liquidated her life. The suggestion wasn't a comfort, it was a threat. The casual, breathtaking cruelty of it, delivered with concerned smiles and gentle touches, was more violent than a physical strike. They weren't just thieves. They were erasing her. They were trying to declare her mentally incompetent before she even had a chance to fight back. In that moment, standing in her own kitchen, being managed and manipulated by her own child, something inside Elizabeth snapped. The quiet, simmering rage ignited. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger, but a cold, clean fire. The flicker of defiance the outline spoke of wasn't just a flicker. It was the pilot light of a furnace. They thought she was a fragile old woman, lost in a fog of grief. They were about to find out how wrong they were. She simply looked at them, at their anxious, greedy faces, and gave a small, slow nod. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice deceptively calm. "Thank you for your concern." The relief that washed over their faces was disgusting. They thought they had won. They thought she had folded. They had no idea that she wasn't surrendering. She was regrouping. They left a few hours later, promising to call and check in, promising to bring over brochures for the residential suite. The moment their car pulled out of the driveway, the mask of the docile widow fell from Elizabeth's face. The house was hostile territory. Now her sanctuary turned into a prison she had to escape. The doubt they had tried to plant in her mind had not taken root. It had festered, and from that festering wound grew a cold, hard certainty. She walked not to her bedroom, but to Robert's old study. The room smelled of him, old books, pipe tobacco, and something uniquely, indefinably Robert. Her eyes landed on the bookshelf. And then she remembered. Years ago, maybe 5 or 6, there had been a string of burglaries in the neighborhood. Robert Ever, the pragmatist, had bought a pack of AirTags. For the luggage, for the car keys, he'd said. She, in a moment of what he'd called her delightful paranoia, had taken one of the small white discs and carefully, painstakingly worked it into the velvet lining at the bottom of her jewelry box. Robert had chuckled. "Who's going to steal that old thing, Lizzie?" he'd teased. "It's what's inside that matters. Asterisk. It's what's inside that matters. Asterisk." The words echoed in her head. Her hands, which had trembled with shock just a day before, were now perfectly steady. She found her old iPad, the one she used for reading the news, and video calling her granddaughter Mia. She swiped it open, her fingers jabbing at the screen, and found the app, a simple blue circle with a white logo. Find My. She tapped it. The app opened to a map of Maple Creek. It took a moment to locate her devices. Her iPad here, with her iPhone on the kitchen counter. And then a third icon popped up. Jewelry box. A single blue dot. It pulsed on the screen, a tiny digital heartbeat. But it wasn't pulsing from inside her house. It was miles away. The map zoomed out, showing the familiar grid of her town, and then moved east across the county line. The dot was blinking steadily in a dense, unfamiliar cluster of streets in the neighbouring town of Oakhaven. A part of town she knew by reputation, only a place of industrial parks, dive bars, and storefronts with iron bars on the windows. The rage that had been simmering inside her now had a direction, a destination. She didn't hesitate. She didn't call the police. This was not their fight yet. This was hers. She opened another app, one she'd only used a handful of times, and requested an Uber. Her hands weren't trembling from age or from fear anymore. They were trembling from a righteous, crystalline fury. The car arrived in minutes, a clean, anonymous sedan. The driver was young music playing softly through the speakers. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, probably wondering what a woman who looked like she belonged in a garden club was doing, heading to this part of Oakhaven. She said nothing, just watched the manicured lawns of Maple Creek give way to cracked pavement and graffiti-scarred walls. The world outside the window was a blur. Her focus was entirely on the pulsing blue dot on her iPad screen. "Here is fine," she said, her voice sharp as the GPS showed they were close. The driver pulled over. "You sure, ma'am? This isn't much of a neighborhood." I'm sure, she said, getting out of the car with a surprising agility. The blue dot led her down a grimy street to a building with a faded, buzzing neon sign. The sign flickered erratically, some of the letters dead. Redemption Pawn and Loan. The irony was so bitter, it almost made her laugh. Redemption. There would be no redemption here. She pushed open a heavy door that chimed electronically and stepped inside. The air was stale, smelling of dust and desperation. Everything was behind thick, bulletproof glass guitars, power tools, outdated electronics, and a sad collection of jewelry, glinting weakly under fluorescent lights. A man sat behind the glass looking up from a paperback novel. He was thick-set with a weary, seen-it-all face and a grey-streaked beard. He looked at Elizabeth, his expression a mixture of boredom and mild surprise. She walked directly to the counter. "I need your help," she said, her voice steady. "Don't we all?" He grunted, not unkindly. "What can I do for you?" 2 days ago, she began her words precise. A couple came in here. A man in his late 40s, tall, a little nervous. A woman with him, younger, blonde, very well dressed. They sold you a ring. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. He dealt with dozens of people a day. Lady, that could be half my customers. It was a man's wedding band, Elizabeth, continued, her gaze unwavering. Vintage, solid gold, simple. It belonged to my husband. He just died. And it was stolen from my home. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Maybe pity. Maybe just professional caution. You file a police report. Not yet, she said. First, I needed to be sure. She slid her iPad under the gap in the glass, the screen still showing the map with the blue dot pulsing right on top of their location. The ring is in this building. It has a tracker in the box it was brought in. The pawnbroker stared at the screen, then back at her. He let out a low whistle. An AirTag. Smart. He sighed, running a hand over his face. Lord, the things people do. He seemed to make a decision. Hang on. He disappeared into a back room. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Elizabeth stood perfectly still, her heart hammering against her ribs. He returned a moment later, holding a small, clear plastic bag. Inside, nestled in a bit of cotton, was Robert's ring. The sight of it, clinical and tagged like evidence, sent a fresh wave of cold fury through her. A couple matching your description sold it 2 days ago, the man said, his voice softer now. Said it was an inheritance. Got $150 for it. $150. The price they'd put on 52 years of love and partnership. The price of their father's legacy. The price of her heart. I need to see them, Elizabeth said. You have cameras, I assume. The man hesitated. Company policy. My son is about to have me declared mentally incompetent, so he can sell my house and put me in a home, she said, the words falling like chips of ice. Company policy is the least of my concerns. I need to see their faces. The man looked at her for a long, hard moment. He saw the grief, but he also saw the steel beneath it. He nodded slowly and turned to a small monitor sitting on the counter behind him. He clicked a mouse a few times, his fingers moving over the keyboard. Here we go, he said, turning the monitor so she could see. 2 days ago, about 3 p.m., the screen flickered to life, displaying a grainy black and white image from a camera pointed at the counter. And there they were, her son and his wife. Jacob was shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking around nervously, just as she'd imagined. But Chloe was leaning against the counter perfectly at ease. She was the one holding the ring, presenting it to the pawnbroker. The man in the video took the ring, examined it, and then counted out some bills. He pushed the cash across the counter. And then Elizabeth saw it. The final damning piece of evidence. Chloe took the money, her movements swift and graceful. She turned to Jacob, and a wide, triumphant smile spread across her face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated victory. Jacob, seeing her smile, broke into a relieved grin of his own. He put his arm around her, pulling her close in a gesture of shared success. They stood there for a moment, bathed in the harsh fluorescent light of the pawn shop, smiling as they sold her most precious memory, her most sacred object, for a handful of cash to fund their lifestyle. Elizabeth stared at the frozen image on the screen. the grainy black and white figures of her children celebrating their betrayal. In that moment, the grieving widow died completely. The woman watching that screen was someone new. She was a strategist. She was a survivor. And she was the architect of the reckoning that was to come. She had the truth. Now she just needed the world to see it. The quiet of the house was different now. It was no longer the hollow silence of grief. It was the tense, waiting silence of a hunting ground. The video from the pawn shop played on a loop in Elizabeth's mind. A venomous little film strip, Chloe's triumphant smile, Jacob's casual hand on her back as they pocketed the cash. Her Robert's ring, the symbol of 52 years, melted down into a vacation. A fancy dinner. A payment to some faceless creditor. Grief had been a fog. This was a shard of ice in her heart. She walked into Robert's office. His sanctuary. In all their years together, she'd rarely entered. It smelled of him, old books, pipe tobacco, and the faint, clean scent of the lemon polish he used on the mahogany desk. It was a room of order, of quiet contemplation. But now she saw it through new eyes. It was a room of secrets. Her mind went back, sifting through the last few years. Robert's growing quietness. The way he'd close his laptop with a sharp snap whenever she came into the living room. The hushed, strained phone calls he'd take out on the porch, his back ramrod straight. It's a market fluctuation, Jacob. These things happen. No, I can't just... It's not that simple. Your mother doesn't need to be worried. She had chalked it up to the anxieties of aging, of watching their retirement funds in a volatile world. A fool. She had been a loving, trusting fool. Her gaze swept the built-in bookshelves that lined one wall, floor to ceiling. Leather-bound classics, histories, biographies. Robert's intellectual fortress. She ran her hand along the spines, the worn leather cool beneath her fingertips. He had arranged them by subject then, alphabetically. A man of systems. A man of order. But where in that order was the chaos he was hiding? She started at the top left, pulling each book out, shaking it gently, feeling its weight. Nothing. She moved along the row, a methodical, painstaking process. An hour passed. Then two. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the room. Her back ached. Her knees protested as she knelt to reach the lower shelves. She thought of Jacob's face when she'd first asked about the ring, that look of patronizing concern. "Mum, you've been under so much stress. Are you sure you remember where you put it?" The words were a brand on her memory. They hadn't just stolen from her. They had tried to steal her reality. Her fingers brushed against a set of Charles Dickens novels. Great Expectations, A Tale of Two Cities, David Copperfield. They were perfect uniform, a matching set, but one felt wrong. She pushed it. It didn't move. She pulled. Nothing. It was fixed to the shelf. Her heart began to beat a heavy, steady drum against her ribs. She ran her fingers along its edge and felt a seam, not a book. A box disguised as a book, a false front. With trembling fingers, she worked at the edge, prying it open. It swung outward on a small, silent hinge, revealing a cavity in the wall behind it. And nestled inside was a small black metal box. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a shoebox, but it felt heavy with significance. It had a simple 3-digit combination lock. She stared at it. What would the combination be? His birthday? The year they met? Then a wave of bitter irony washed over her. She knew. Of course she knew. She dialed the numbers. 6, 1, 8. The 18th of June. Their wedding anniversary. The lock clicked open. She lifted the lid. The air that escaped smelled of dust and secrets. Inside there were two things. The first was a stack of thick, cream-coloured envelopes, sealed with wax, each one numbered in Robert's precise, elegant script. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The second was a single, thick black ledger. She took the box to the large leather armchair, where Robert used to sit and read for hours. She turned on his old brass reading lamp, its warm glow illuminating the particles of dust dancing in the air. For a moment she hesitated. This was a line. Once she crossed it, there was no going back. The image of Chloe's smile flashed in her mind again. She opened the ledger. The first page was dated 10 years ago. Robert's handwriting was, as she always remembered it, neat, controlled the script of an engineer. Asterisk the 12th of October 2015. Transferred $15,000 to Jacob. He called it seed money for a new tech venture. Some sort of app for curating experiences. He was so full of passion. I hope this is the one. Asterisk. Elizabeth's throat tightened. She remembered that. Jacob had given a dazzling presentation at Sunday dinner full of buzzwords and projections. He'd made it sound like he was the next Steve Jobs. Robert had been so proud. She turned the page. Asterisk the 2nd of March 2016. Transferred $25,000. The app development hit a snag. Jacob said he needed to hire a more experienced coder. He seemed stressed. Chloe mentioned they were having trouble with their rent. I told him this was the last of the seed money. He has to make it work. Asterisk. The entries continued a slow, sickening drip of financial first aid. The tone of Robert's notes began to change. The hopefulness bled out, replaced by a weary resignation. Then a quiet alarm. Asterisk. The 20th of January 2018. Had to liquidate the Franklin Templeton Fund. $47,000. Jacob admitted the app failed months ago. He didn't tell me. He used the money to cover debts. He wouldn't say what kind. He just kept repeating, "I can fix this, Dad. I swear I can fix this." His voice, it didn't sound like my son. Asterisk. Elizabeth felt a cold dread seeping into her bones. This wasn't just a failed startup. This was something darker. She read on the lamp humming beside her as the house grew darker and colder. The neat script became a testament to a decade of decay. The entries weren't just about money anymore. They were about character. Asterisk. The 5th of September 2019. He's gambling. Online. He finally admitted it. He talks about algorithms and sure things. But his eyes are hollow. He lost $60,000 on a site called Spin Empire. He swore it was a one-time thing, that he was chasing a loss from a bad investment. I paid it. What else could I do? Let him be ruined. Let Chloe and little Mia be put on the street. Asterisk. Mia. The name was a physical blow. He had a daughter. He had a family. Elizabeth's hands shook as she turned the pages faster, the numbers blurring into an avalanche of ruin. Asterisk the 11th of July 2021. Crypto. A new poison. He called me ecstatic about something called Bitflux. Said he'd turned 5,000 into 50,000 in a week. 2 weeks later, he called me sobbing. It was all gone. And not just the 50,000. He'd taken out a private loan. A man with a voice like gravel on the phone called the house looking for him. I paid that too. $80,000. I had to sell the shares I'd inherited from my father. Asterisk. Elizabeth let out a sound, a choked gasp. The shares from her father-in-law. The ones Robert had always said were their never-touch safety net. He'd sold them for this. For Jacob. The night wore on. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. She just read, absorbing the secret history of her husband's pain. The last few entries from the months before his death were almost illegible. The neat script had devolved into a desperate, shaky scrawl. The ink was sometimes smudged as if by a tear or a drop of sweat. Asterisk, the 14th of February 2025. Valentine's Day. He asked for more. I told him there was nothing left. The retirement accounts are ghosts of what they were. The savings are gone. He didn't seem to understand. He just kept saying Chloe had expectations, that they had a lifestyle to maintain. He looked at me at this house as if it were a bank vault. He was entitled to empty asterisk, the 2nd of March 2025. He knows I'm sick. The doctor was clear. And yet he talks about a new, can't, Miss Real Estate venture. I see the look in his eyes. He's not looking at his father. He's looking at his inheritance. The thought is a cancer worse than the one in my own body. What have I done by trying to save him? Have I simply destroyed him? Have I created a monster asterisk? The final entry was just 2 weeks before Robert's heart finally gave out. Asterisk, the 28th of March, 2025. God help me. God help Elizabeth. Asterisk, she closed the ledger. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Robert hadn't died of a heart attack. He had died of a broken heart. He had spent the last decade of his life fighting a lonely secret war to protect his family, not from an outside threat, but from their own son. And he had hidden it from her, to protect her. The thought was both a comfort and an agony. He had carried this crushing weight alone, letting it eat away at him day by day, while she had bustled around him worrying about his cholesterol and whether he'd taken his blood pressure medication. The grief she felt was new and raw. It was for the man who had suffered in silence, but beneath it, the ice shard in her heart was growing, hardening into something sharp and strong. A weapon. This wasn't just about a stolen ring anymore. This was about a stolen life. A stolen legacy. Robert's legacy. And she would be damned if she let Jacob and Chloe be the ones to write the final chapter. The doorbell chimed 2 days later, a cheerful, jarring sound in the oppressive quiet of the house. Elizabeth opened it to find her granddaughter Mia standing on the porch, a worried frown on her young face. "Grandma, I've been calling. You didn't answer." Mia's eyes, so much like Robert's, scanned Elizabeth's face. "Are you okay? You look exhausted." She stepped inside, wrapping Elizabeth in a hug that felt both comforting and foreign. Mia was a good girl, a bright spot. A university student full of life and plans. She was untainted by the filth Elizabeth had spent the last 48 hours submerged in. "I'm fine, dear. Just a lot on my mind." Elizabeth's voice was hoarse. "You should be resting, Mia," said her brow furrowed with genuine concern. She put her backpack down on the floor. "Maybe we can go out. Get some lunch. It's not good for you to be cooped up in here alone." An idea began to form in Elizabeth's mind, cold and precise. An opportunity. Actually, Elizabeth said, forcing a weak smile. "I was thinking I need to get with the times. I feel so disconnected from everything. All you young people are on your social media, the Facebooks and the Instagrams. I don't even know how they work." Mia looked surprised, but a small smile touched her lips. "Really? You want to learn about Instagram?" "Yes," Elizabeth said, her voice gaining a bit of strength. "Your father and Chloe are always talking about it. I'd like to see what all the fuss is about. To, see what my family is up to. Feel connected." It was the perfect lie. A lonely old woman trying to bridge the generation gap. "Okay," Mia said, pulling out her sleek smartphone. "Sure, Grandma. I can show you. Let's sit down." They sat on the living room sofa, the same sofa where Jacob and Chloe had sat and lied to her face. Mia was patient, her voice soft as she explained what a profile was, what a story was, how to follow someone. "Okay, so first let's look up Mom and Dad Mia," said, typing Jacob Miller into the search bar. His profile picture appeared. It was him and Chloe clinking champagne glasses on a balcony overlooking a turquoise sea. They looked radiant, carefree. "Rich. Their account is public, so you can see everything," Mia explained, oblivious. "See, here are all their pictures." She began to scroll. Elizabeth's heart turned to a block of granite in her chest. It was worse than she could have imagined. It was a curated museum of their lies. There was a photo of Chloe laughing, holding up a lobster the size of her head at a seaside restaurant. The caption read, "Celebrating a big win. So proud of my brilliant husband. Number, hard work pays off, number, power couple." Elizabeth's mind flashed to the ledger. To Robert's shaky handwriting on the exact same date. Another loan. From a man named Silas Richter. The interest rate is criminal. Jacob was desperate. Said it was to avoid ruin. Asterisk. Mia scrolled down. A picture of a brand new glossy black Tesla parked in their driveway, a giant red bow on the hood. Jacob stood beside it, arms crossed, a smug grin on his face. New year, new ride. The future is electric. Number, Tesla. Number, success. Number hustle. Elizabeth's eyes burned. The ledger. Had to sell the last of the gold coins I kept in the safe deposit box. The ones my grandfather brought from the old country. It was the only way to cover the down payment for the car Chloe insisted they needed. Asterisk. On and on it went. A digital parade of their fraud. A vacation to Bali. They were posing with monkeys, surfing, drinking from coconuts on a white sand beach. Number blessed. Number wanderlust. Number living a best life. Robert's entry for that week. I don't know how I'm going to make the property tax payment this year. I may have to take out a reverse mortgage. I can't let Elizabeth know. The shame would be too much. Asterisk. A flurry of posts from Michelin-starred restaurants in the city. Exquisite plates of food artfully arranged. Each post was a dagger. Each picture was paid for with a piece of her husband's soul. Each happy, smiling photo was built on a foundation of his secret despair. They seem to be doing really well, Mia said, a note of simple pride in her voice. Dad was always so worried about money, but it looks like his new consulting gig is really paying off. Elizabeth felt a surge of nausea. She wanted to scream. She wanted to grab the phone and hurl it against the wall. She wanted to tell Mia the truth, that her parents' beautiful life was a grotesque illusion, funded by her grandfather's slow, agonizing ruin and the sale of a sacred wedding band. But she held it in. She locked it down behind a mask of quiet curiosity. They do look happy, Elizabeth, said her voice miraculously steady. He's a good boy, your father. He always wanted to provide for his family. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. Can you show me Chloe's page? She asked. Mia navigated to her mother's profile. It was even worse. More fashion. More luxury. Close-up shots of new jewelry. A diamond tennis bracelet. A designer watch. A video of her laughing as she ran into the ocean on that Bali beach, her new bikini shimmering in the sun. And there, in a post from 6 months ago, was a photo of her and Jacob at a charity gala. Chloe was wearing a stunning evening gown, and on her finger, sparkling under the lights, was a new ostentatious diamond ring. The caption read, "Sometimes you just have to treat yourself. Love my new bling asterisk." Elizabeth stared at the picture. She thought of her own ring, Robert's ring. Simple, classic, worn smooth with 52 years of love and life. It wasn't bling. It was a promise. And they had traded it and so much more for this cheap, glittering facade. She loves shopping, Mia chuckled. Drives my dad crazy sometimes. I can imagine, Elizabeth said softly. She had seen enough. The proof wasn't just in the ledger. It was here broadcast for the whole world to see, a boastful, arrogant confession written in hashtags and filters. Thank you, dear Elizabeth, said, patting Mia's hand. That was very illuminating. I think I'm starting to get the hang of it. Any time, Grandma Mia said, smiling. I'm glad you're taking an interest. After Mia left, Elizabeth sat in the silent living room for a long time. The digital ghosts of Jacob and Chloe's perfect life danced behind her eyes. The contrast, the public triumph and the private documented ruin was sickeningly clear. They hadn't just lied. They had performed. They had built a stage, and the props were all purchased with Robert's life force. The ice in her heart was no longer just a shard. It was a glacier. Cold, immense, and moving with unstoppable force. She now had the ledger. She had the digital footprint. It was a start. But she knew it wasn't enough. They had painted her as a grieving, confused old woman. They would use that painting against her. She needed more. She needed a weapon so powerful, so undeniable, that it would shatter their carefully constructed reality to pieces. She picked up the phone and made an appointment. The law offices of Davies and Finch were on the top floor of the newest, tallest building in downtown Maple Creek. It was all glass and steel, a world away from her cozy, memory-filled house. The air inside smelled of expensive leather and ambition. Mr. Davis was exactly as his office suggested, sharp, modern, and without a trace of sentimentality. He was younger than she expected, with piercing grey eyes, and a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like armour. He didn't offer condolences or platitudes. He shook her hand, firmly gestured to a chair, and said, "Mrs. Miller, tell me what's happened." Elizabeth had rehearsed this. She laid it out piece by piece, her voice low and steady. She started with the missing ring, the pawn shop, the security footage. She moved on to the discovery of the hidden box, the ledger. She didn't cry. She didn't allow her voice to tremble. She presented the facts, as Robert might have, with cold, hard precision. She told him about the decade of debt, the gambling, the crypto losses. She told him about the social media profiles, the Tesla, the trip to Bali. Davies listened without interruption. He didn't take notes. His eyes never left her face, his expression unreadable. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the sterile room. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers under his chin. "This is a deeply ugly situation, Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice calm and even. "And I believe every word you've said." A flicker of relief went through her. "So we can take them to court. For fraud. Theft." Davies held up a hand. "Slow down. Belief is one thing. Proof is another. A court of law is something else entirely." He leaned forward, his gaze intensifying. "Let me tell you what will happen the moment you file a single piece of paper. The very first thing your son and his wife will do is file a petition for conservatorship." The word hung in the air. Conservatorship. She'd heard it on the news. It was for people who couldn't take care of themselves. What she whispered. "They will paint a picture." Davies continued, his voice relentless. "Of a beloved grieving mother. 78 years old. Recently widowed. Deeply distraught and confused. Prone to fantasy and paranoia. They will say she is misplacing things like a precious ring. They will say she is concocting wild stories about a secret ledger and financial conspiracies. They will say she is lashing out in her pain." Every word was a hammer blow. He was describing their exact strategy. "They will bring in doctors," he went on, his voice dropping slightly. "Psychiatrists who will testify that your grief has triggered a cognitive decline. They will use your age against you. They will use your love for your husband against you. They will argue that you are no longer competent to manage your own affairs, particularly your finances. Their goal will be to have you declared legally incompetent." He let that sink in. The clinical coldness of the room felt like it was freezing her blood. "And if they succeed," she asked, her voice barely audible. "If they succeed," Davies said, his eyes locking onto hers, "they get everything. A court-appointed conservator. Likely Jacob himself will be given total control over your life. Your assets, your home, your medical decisions. They will sell this house you love. Move you into a facility of their choosing and control every last penny of Robert's estate. They will put you exactly where they want you, silenced, powerless, and out of the way. And they will do it all under the guise of caring for their ailing mother. The ledger you found, they will claim it's a fantasy, a product of your dementia. The social media posts irrelevant. They'll say they were trying to maintain a brave face during a difficult time." Elizabeth felt the walls of the glass office closing in. It was a cage. A perfect legal cage built from love and concern and forged in the fires of the court system. They had thought of everything. "So what do I do?" she asked, the fight draining out of her. "Is it hopeless?" "It's not hopeless," Davies said, "but it is incredibly difficult. We can't fight them on their terms. We can't get dragged into a messy he said, she said battle over your mental state. That's a fight we are statistically likely to lose." He paused, letting the weight of the obstacle settle. "You need more than suspicion, Mrs. Miller. You have a motive, and you have some compelling but private evidence. What you don't have is a smoking gun. You need proof. Not just proof for a judge, but proof for the court of public opinion. You need something so undeniable, so public, so profoundly shameful that it makes it impossible for any court, any doctor, any family member to side with them. You need to expose them so thoroughly that their petition for conservatorship would be laughed out of the building before the ink is dry. You need to create a situation where they are so radioactive that no one will touch them." Elizabeth looked out the window at the city below. People, bustling cars, moving a world going on completely unaware of the war being planned in this sterile, air-conditioned room. Davies was right. A quiet legal battle was a death sentence. She couldn't win by whispering in a judge's chambers. She had to scream from the rooftop. She thought of the stage Jacob and Chloe had built for themselves on social media. A stage of lies. Perhaps she thought a stage was exactly what she needed. She turned back to Mr. Davis, the fear in her chest, being replaced by something cold and hard and clear. A plan. It was not fully formed, but the foundation was there. Undeniable public proof. She repeated the words, feeling solid in her mouth. Exactly, he said. Then that Elizabeth said, her voice filled with a resolve that surprised even herself, is what I will find. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the house's oppressive silence. Elizabeth looked at the screen. Chloe. She let it ring twice more before answering, her finger pressing the green icon with a steadiness that felt foreign. Elizabeth, hi, it's me. Chloe's voice was a syrupy concoction of forced sympathy and barely concealed impatience. I was just thinking about you all alone in that big house. It must be so difficult. Elizabeth said nothing, simply listening to the manufactured concern. Anyway, Chloe continued, the brief pause having served its performative purpose. Jacob and I were talking, and we had an idea. We feel terrible that Robert's passing was so rushed. The funeral was so grim. He deserved more. He deserved a celebration. Elizabeth's gaze drifted to the mantelpiece, to the photograph of Robert, his smile genuine and easy. A celebration. The word was a profanity. So Chloe went on, her voice brightening with the cadence of someone announcing a prize. We want to host a celebration of life for him. At the house. It just feels right, to have everyone who loved him back in the home he built. We've already started reaching out to the family, your sister, Robert's cousins from Oregon, everyone. We want them all there to share their memories. There it was. The maneuver. Gather the clan, present the image of the devoted son and the caring daughter-in-law. A preemptive strike of public relations before they moved to have her declared incompetent. They weren't just stealing her past. They were trying to orchestrate her future. It would mean so much to Jacob to do this for his father. Chloe added a hint of steel beneath the sugar. And it would be good for you, Elizabeth, to be surrounded by family. Elizabeth looked at her own reflection in the dark screen of the television. She saw the lines of grief, but she also saw something else hardening in her eyes. A resolve as cold and clear as glass. They were building a stage, laying a trap for her. They had no idea she was the one who would be pulling the strings. That's a very thoughtful idea, Chloe Elizabeth, said her voice. Perfectly calm, level, not a tremor of the fury roiling inside her. Yes, I think that would be lovely. A flicker of surprise in Chloe's audible exhale. She had expected a fight, a protest from a grieving, confused old woman. She hadn't expected easy capitulation. Oh, wonderful. That's just wonderful, Elizabeth. Don't you worry about a thing. Jacob and I will handle everything. The food, the invitations, everything. You just rest. We'll make it a day Robert would have been proud of. I'm sure you will, Elizabeth said softly and ended the call. She placed the phone on the table. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was no longer the silence of loss. It was the silence of a hunter waiting. Her stage, her audience, her script, and the final act was already written. 2 days before the scheduled celebration, the mail carrier, a young man named Tom, who had known Robert for years, handed her a small stack of envelopes. Just these today, Mrs. Morgan. Hope you're doing okay. Thank you, Tom. I'm managing, she replied, offering a small, tired smile that cost her more than he could ever know. She closed the door and shuffled through the bills and junk mail. Then she saw it. A crisp, cream-coloured envelope with a green-striped border. Certified mail. Her heart didn't leap with fear, but with a cold, grim certainty. She looked at the addressee. It wasn't for her. Jacob and Chloe Morgan. Asterisk. And below their names, her address, 142 Maple Creek Lane. They had been using her home as a mail drop. A shield. a place to hide their crumbling world from prying eyes while they projected an image of effortless success on Instagram. Her fingers, usually stiff with age, were nimble as she tore it open. The letterhead was from a law firm she didn't recognize. The language was dense, legalistic, but the keywords screamed from the page. Notice of foreclosure. Failure to remit payment. Delinquency. Seizure of property. Asterisk. Their house, the ostentatious 5-bedroom monument to their greed with its oversized pool and 3-car garage that housed the Tesla. It was all a lie, a house of cards, financed by her husband's life savings. And now it was collapsing. This wasn't just a piece of mail. This was a weapon. She folded it carefully and placed it on the dining table, the first piece of evidence for the jury she was about to assemble. Her work wasn't done. She walked into Robert's study, the room still smelling faintly of his old books and pipe tobacco. She knelt her knees, protesting, and pulled back the Persian rug. She worked her fingers into the seam between 2 floorboards until one lifted, revealing the small steel box. Inside, nestled among the ledgers, were the sealed envelopes Robert had left. She had opened them one by one over the past week, each one a fresh stab of pain. A new layer of his secret burden revealed. But one remained. It was thicker than the others, made of heavy manila paper, with a single word written in Robert's shaky hand. Forgive me. Asterisk. Her breath hitched. This was the last secret. The one he couldn't bear to write about in the ledgers. The one that she suspected had finally broken his heart. With trembling hands, she broke the seal. There was no letter inside. Just a single multi-page document stapled in the corner. It was a copy of a contract. A personal loan agreement. The lender was not a bank. The name at the top was Silas Richter. Elizabeth felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft in the old house. The name was infamous in the Central Valley. A predator who circled the desperate, a loan shark who didn't break kneecaps but shattered lives, with clauses and penalties written in blood. The principal amount was staggering. A final desperate infusion of cash for Jacob. The date was only 6 months ago. She scanned the document, her eyes catching on the interest rate, a figure so obscene it was practically theft. But it was the final page that made the air leave her lungs in a silent scream. Section 4B, Collateral in lieu of default. She read it once. Then again. The words blurred, reforming into a sentence of such monstrous cruelty that she had to put a hand on the desk to steady herself. The collateral Jacob had offered the price of his final failure should the money not be repaid was not a car, not a stock portfolio, not even the deed to his soon-to-be foreclosed house. It was the legal guardianship of his only child. Her granddaughter. Mia. The world tilted. The room grew small and tight. Robert hadn't just been paying off Jacob's financial debts. He had been paying a ransom for his own granddaughter who had been wagered in a high-stakes poker game like a stack of chips. And the ring. The sudden, gut-wrenching realization hit her. The stolen ring sold for cash at a pawn shop. It wasn't just to fund another vacation or a designer purse. It was a frantic, pathetic attempt to scrape together enough money to make a payment to Silas Richter, to keep this single, unforgivable secret buried. It wasn't about hiding their financial ruin. It was about hiding their monstrosity. Elizabeth sank into Robert's leather chair, the cold contract in her hand. The grief, the anger, the betrayal, it all coalesced into something new, a diamond-hard certainty. They had not just disrespected the dead. They had tried to sell the living. Forgiveness was a currency she no longer possessed. The day of the celebration arrived cloaked in a deceptive California sun. Her house, felt alien. It was filled with the low hum of unfamiliar voices, the clinking of glasses, and the smell of fried chicken. Chloe, in a stunning display of tactical ignorance, had ordered catering from KFC. Buckets of it sat on the fine mahogany dining table, a greasy monument to her lack of grace. Relatives milled about, awkwardly offering Elizabeth tight, pitying hugs and murmuring condolences. He was a good man, Elizabeth. So sorry for your loss. You're so strong. Each word was a small, dull blade. They saw a frail widow lost in her grief. They had no idea they were speaking to a general on the eve of battle. Elizabeth moved through the crowd like a ghost, a polite smile fixed on her face, her eyes scanning the room, taking a final inventory of the faces that had known her for decades. Her sister Martha, who looked at her with genuine worry. Robert's cousins a little too loud, after a few glasses of the cheap Chardonnay Chloe had provided. And there by the window was Mia, her granddaughter. She was 15 with Robert's thoughtful eyes and a haunted, sad expression she tried to hide behind her phone screen. She looked lost adrift in a family that was about to be torn apart at its foundations. Then, a hush fell over the room. Jacob, holding a glass of red wine, had moved to stand before the fireplace, directly beneath the portrait of his parents, on their wedding day. He cleared his throat, a practiced sound of solemnity. Chloe stood near him, a hand on his arm, her face a mask of proud, supportive sorrow. The performance was beginning. "Thank you all for being here," Jacob began, his voice thick with an emotion he had clearly rehearsed. "It means the world to us, to my mother, to see how many lives my father Robert touched." He took a sip of wine. "I look at this house, the home he built with his own 2 hands, and I think of his integrity. He was a man of his word, a man whose handshake was a binding contract. He taught me the value of hard work, of honesty. He believed that a man's character was his only true asset." Elizabeth watched him, her expression unreadable. She could feel the weight of the ledgers in her mind, the phantom script of Robert's pen documenting lie after lie, betrayal after betrayal. "He was generous," Jacob continued, his voice cracking on cue. "Generous to a fault. If anyone was in need, my father was the first to offer a helping hand. He never wanted recognition. He just wanted to know he had eased someone's burden. That's the kind of man he was. A provider, a protector." A wave of appreciative murmurs rippled through the room. A few of the older relatives dabbed at their eyes with tissues. Chloe squeezed his arm, her smile glistening. "He leaves behind a legacy of honor," Jacob concluded, raising his glass. "A legacy I will spend the rest of my life trying to live up to. To my father, Robert Morgan, we will miss you forever." To Robert, the crowd echoed a ragged chorus of voices lifting their glasses. As the applause, polite and somber, filled the room, Elizabeth felt a profound and chilling stillness settle over her. The eulogy wasn't just a lie, it was a desecration. It was a final theft, stealing the truth of a good man's suffering to polish the tarnished image of the son who had caused it. While Jacob accepted condolences, basking in the glow of his false tribute, Elizabeth quietly picked up her iPad from the side table. Her movements were slow, deliberate, each one weighted with purpose. She walked towards the large, smart television mounted over the fireplace, the centerpiece of the room. The remote was on the mantel. She picked it up. The time for silence was over. The chatter began to swell again as people refilled their glasses and reached for another piece of chicken. Jacob was laughing at something his uncle said, his face flushed with wine and self-satisfaction. Elizabeth pressed the power button on the remote. The television screen flickered to life, its bright blue light momentarily silencing the conversations closest to it. "I have something to add to Jacob's tribute," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a shard of ice. Every head turned towards her. Jacob's smile froze on his face. Chloe's expression tightened. "My husband, as Jacob said, was a man of his word." Elizabeth continued, her gaze sweeping over the assembled family. "He was also a meticulous record keeper. He documented everything. I thought you all should see the full extent of the legacy he left behind." With a few taps on her iPad, she connected it to the television. The Apple Television logo appeared, then vanished. Replaced by an image so jarringly out of place, it elicited a collective gasp. It was a photo from Chloe's Instagram page. There they were, Jacob and Chloe, tanned and laughing, clinking champagne glasses in a stunning infinity pool overlooking a turquoise sea. The caption read, "Living our best life in Bali, number blessed, number couple goals." The date was clearly visible, the 14th of April 2024. Before anyone could fully process the image, Elizabeth swiped. The screen changed. The vibrant colours of Bali were replaced by the stark black and white of a scanned document. It was a page from Robert's ledger, his familiar neat handwriting now looking frail and desperate on the giant screen. The entry was dated the 14th of April 2024. It read asterisk sent Jacob another $20 K. He says it's an investment opportunity, a sure thing. He says it's the last time. I don't believe him. The lies are eating him alive. Had to sell the last of the municipal bonds. Asterisk. A wave of shocked silence washed over the room. You could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Elizabeth swiped again. A new Instagram post. Jacob standing proudly beside a brand new gleaming white Tesla, the gull-wing doors open. The caption. New year, new ride. Hard work pays off asterisk. The date the 5th of January 2025. Swipe. Another ledger page, same date. Asterisk cashed out my 401k, all of it. The market is down, but Jacob was frantic. He said people were threatening him. He wouldn't say who. I feel so tired. My hands were shaking so much I could barely sign the paperwork. Asterisk. The murmurs started then low and angry. People were looking from the screen to Jacob, whose face had gone from ruddy to a pasty, sickly white. Chloe stood frozen, her hand no longer on his arm. Swipe. A photo of a lavish dinner, a dozen plates of intricate, expensive-looking food, an array of wine bottles. Chloe's post. Tasting menu at the French Laundry spoiled. By my amazing husband, asterisk swipe, Robert's ledger. The entry was a single heartbreaking line. Asterisk pawned my father's watch today. The one he carried through the war. Needed $1,500 for the mortgage. Didn't tell Elizabeth. Asterisk. Elizabeth's sister Martha let out a choked sob. Robert's cousins from Oregon were staring at Jacob with open disgust. Elizabeth let the last image hang there for a moment, a testament to her husband's private shame. Then for the final brutal stroke, she swiped one last time. The screen was filled with the cold official text of the certified letter she had received 2 days earlier. The bold letters at the top seemed to scream into the silent room. Notice of foreclosure. Asterisk. Addressed to Jacob and Chloe Morgan. At this very address, the illusion was not just cracked, it was shattered. The entire room filled with family now saw the truth. The beautiful, successful, devoted children were nothing but parasites who had drained their father dry and were now on the verge of losing everything themselves. A sound high and piercing tore through the silence. No, Chloe shrieked, her voice stripped of all its sweetness, raw and ugly. She's lying. She's lost her mind. Grief has made her crazy. She's a vindictive, hateful old woman. Jacob, snapping out of his stupor, lunged towards the television as if he could physically claw the truth from the screen. Turn it off. Turn it off now. Elizabeth held up a single hand. The gesture was not frail. It was filled with an authority that stopped him cold. He stood there halfway between his seat and the fireplace, trapped in the glare of his own disgrace. I'm not finished, Elizabeth said, her voice resonating with a cold power that no one in that room had ever heard from her before. You spoke of my husband's generosity, Jacob. You spoke of the burdens he eased. You left one out. There's one more debt. She tapped the screen of her iPad one final time. The foreclosure notice vanished, replaced by the scanned image of the loan contract. The name Silas Richter at the top was a thunderclap in the oppressive quiet. A few of the men in the room who knew the name paled visibly. Robert's final payment, Elizabeth announced, her voice as sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. The one that drained the last of his life savings wasn't for a business deal. It wasn't for an investment. She turned her head slowly, her gaze moving from Jacob to Chloe, and finally landing on her granddaughter Mia, who was standing by the window, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. It was to pay off a gambling debt, Elizabeth said, letting the words hang in the air. A debt from a private poker game. But when the money ran out, your father needed collateral to stay in the game, something the man he owed couldn't refuse. She looked directly at Jacob, now her eyes locking onto his. Tell them, Jacob. Tell the family what you put up as collateral in case you couldn't pay. Jacob just stared, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. "He won't say it," Elizabeth said to the room, "because there are no words for it." She pointed a steady finger at the television screen at the highlighted clause in the contract. "The collateral Jacob put up," she said, her voice breaking with a lifetime of suppressed rage and sorrow, was the legal guardianship of his own daughter. The truth landed not like a sound, but like a physical blow. The air was sucked from the room. "He wagered you, Mia." A strangled animal cry was ripped from Mia's throat. Her phone clattered to the floor. Her face, which had been a canvas of confusion, was now contorted in a mask of absolute soul-shattering horror and betrayal. Her eyes were fixed on her father, seeing him for the very first time. That Elizabeth said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the silent room, is the secret they pawned my wedding ring to keep buried. It was never about the money. It was about hiding this. Hiding that they are monsters. The silence in the living room was a physical thing. It was heavier than the grief that had filled the same space just weeks before. Every eye was fixed on the television where the cold black and white text of the foreclosure notice hung like a death sentence. Jacob's face, once a mask of performative sorrow, was now slack with disbelief. Chloe's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The air crackled, waiting for the first crack in the ice. It came from David Roberts' younger brother. A man of few words, a carpenter, whose hands were as honest as his gaze. He didn't look at Elizabeth. He looked at his nephew. "Jacob," he said, his voice a low rumble of gravel. "Is this true?" Chloe found her voice, then a shrill, piercing shriek that shattered the quiet. "No, of course not. It's her. She's confused. She's been seeing things, saying things. The grief, it's scrambled her mind. We've been so worried." She gestured wildly at Elizabeth, who sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the iPad in her lap. "She's the one who needs help." But the poison had already spread. No one was looking at Elizabeth. They were looking at the screen, at the damning juxtaposition of a laughing couple on a beach in Bali, next to a ledger entry detailing another desperate loan from Robert. The dates matched. The amounts matched. The lie was surgically exposed, laid bare for all to see. Aunt Carol, who had always sent lavish Christmas gifts and praised Chloe's impeccable taste, took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted from Chloe's designer dress to the image of the pawn shop receipt on the screen. The price of the dress was probably on that receipt somewhere. "The ring," Chloe Carroll whispered the question, slicing through the air. Robert's ring. It was for her future, Jacob stammered, finally finding his footing, his voice slick with the old familiar justifications. "We were investing it to make sure she was secure. The house, the upkeep. We were trying to protect her, to protect Dad's legacy." A bitter laugh erupted from the back of the room. It was Mark, a cousin, a high school teacher who drove a 10-year-old sedan. Protect his legacy. By bankrupting him. By selling his wedding ring to pay for a Tesla. Is that what they teach in business school these days, Jake? The family shifted. It was a subtle, primal movement. The loose circle they had formed to listen to the eulogy began to tighten, not around Elizabeth in support, but around Jacob and Chloe in judgment. They were being cut out of the herd, one disgusted glance at a time. And Mia, it was David's wife, Sarah, her voice trembling with a fury that made everyone flinch. She was a nurse who had helped care for Robert in his final days. The contract. The one with that man's name on it. Silas Richter. It said her name. Elizabeth watched, a silent observer to the storm she had summoned. She didn't need to say another word. She had planted the seeds, and now she was watching the bitter harvest. "That's a forgery," Chloe screamed, her composure finally cracking completely. She lunged towards the television as if she could physically tear the image down. "She's a crazy old woman. She faked all of this, Jacob. Tell them. Tell them she's lying." But Jacob was cornered. His gaze was darting from face to face, searching for an ally, a friendly eye, a shred of doubt. He found none. He saw only the reflection of his own betrayal in the eyes of the people who had known him his entire life. He saw his father's brother, his mother's sister, the cousins he'd grown up with, all looking at him as if he were a stranger. A monster. My God, Jacob David, said his voice now dangerously soft. Your own daughter. You put a price on your own daughter. That was the final blow. The words hung in the air, irrefutable and obscene. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in on Jacob and Chloe. The faces of their family were a wall of revulsion. Chloe began to sob, a theatrical, heaving display that won her no sympathy. We were desperate. You don't understand. The debts. He was going to. We had to do something. We were going to pay it back. We were desperate. Jacob just stood there, his face pale, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There were no more words. There were no more lies big enough to cover this. David took a step forward. He wasn't a large man, but at that moment he seemed to fill the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Get out, he said. Chloe stared at him aghast. What? Get out of this house, David repeated, his voice flat and final. He pointed a calloused finger towards the front door. Now, it wasn't a request. It was a verdict. You can't throw us out, Jacob. Finally managed a spark of his old arrogance flaring up. This is our mother's house. No, Elizabeth said, her voice cutting through the chaos for the first time. It was quiet, yet it carried more weight than all of Chloe's hysterics. This was your father's house. A house he nearly lost because of you. And now it is my house. And I want you to leave. But it wasn't her command that moved them. It was the collective will of the family. Mark, the teacher, stepped up beside David. Uncle George, a retired plumber, moved to block the hallway. Aunt Carol, her face a mask of cold fury, picked up Chloe's expensive handbag from a chair and thrust it at her. He said, "Get out," Carol hissed. There was no physical violence, no shouting match. It was something far worse. It was a slow, deliberate, and unanimous shunning. Jacob and Chloe were herded towards the door, not by an angry mob, but by the quiet, implacable disgust of their kin. They were being surgically removed from the family. As they reached the foyer, Jacob turned his eyes, finally landing on his mother. He looked for a flicker of pity, a sign of regret. He saw only a calm, steady gaze, the gaze of a woman who had seen the truth and had chosen it over him. The front door opened, and they were ushered out into the late afternoon sun. The door closed behind them with a soft final click. Inside, the silence returned, but it was different now. It was the quiet of a battlefield after the war is over. The remaining family members stood awkwardly looking at the floor, at the walls, at anything but each other. The social contract that had bound them together was shattered. The image of the perfect grieving family was incinerated. Elizabeth remained seated, her fingers still resting on the screen of the iPad. She had not raised her voice. She had not laid a hand on them. She had simply held up a mirror, and the reflection had destroyed them. There would be no police, no lawsuits. The judgment had been passed, and the sentence had been carried out right here in the living room. They had lost everything, and she was finally terrifyingly alone. The weeks that followed were a blur of deliberate motion. The silence in the house, once a heavy blanket of grief, was now a hollow echo chamber of bad memories. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corner seemed to whisper of secrets and lies. Elizabeth found she couldn't breathe properly in the place she had called home for 52 years. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a mausoleum. She called a real estate agent, a brisk professional woman named Susan, with a sharp suit and a compassionate smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Susan walked through the house, making notes on a tablet, talking about curb appeal and staging, and the fantastic seller's market. The bones on this place are just incredible, Elizabeth, Susan said, tapping a wall in the dining room. Hardwood floors, original crown moulding. Buyers go crazy for this kind of character. Elizabeth looked at the wall Susan was tapping. She remembered Robert spending an entire weekend patching a hole there after Jacob, then 6 years old, had tried to ride his tricycle down the stairs. She saw the faint water stain on the ceiling from the time a teenage Jacob had left the bath running, flooding the floor while he was on the phone with his first girlfriend. Character. It was all character. Packing was the hardest part. She hired a company to do the heavy lifting, but the personal effects were hers to sort. She moved from room to room, a ghost in her own life opening drawers and closets that had been closed for years. She found Robert's collection of old jazz records, Jacob's high school yearbooks, photo albums, filled with smiling faces that now looked like strangers. Each object was a landmine, a tiny silver baby rattle. She remembered the weight of a newborn Jacob in her arms, his tiny fingers wrapped around hers. She put it in a box labeled Donate, a framed photo of Robert and a 20-year-old Jacob on a fishing trip, both of them grinning, holding up a ridiculously small fish. The memory was so clear, so pure, it felt like a betrayal. She placed the frame face down in a trash bag. This wasn't just cleaning out a house, it was an exorcism. She was systematically dismantling a life, severing the emotional tethers one by one. Her son was gone. Not dead, but erased. He and Chloe had vanished. Their phones were disconnected. Their social media pages were deleted. It was as if they had never existed. She heard whispers through the fractured remnants of the family. They had left town. Gone to Florida, someone said. Or was it Arizona? No one knew. No one cared enough to find out. Their exile was absolute. The real estate agent was ruthlessly efficient. The house sold in 2 weeks, for a price that made Elizabeth's head spin. She signed the paperwork in a sterile lawyer's office. Her signature, clear and steady on the dotted line. As she handed the pen back, she felt a profound sense of lightness. She wasn't selling a house. She was selling a story. She was selling the weight of 52 years of quiet endurance of secrets, kept of pain swallowed. She was buying her freedom. She didn't look for another house. The very idea of a yard to mow, of empty rooms to fill, was suffocating. Instead, she found what she was looking for across town, in a new development that had sprung up from an old industrial lot. It was a tower of glass and steel, a place with no history, no ghosts. The condo was on the 12th floor. It was all clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, and polished concrete floors. The kitchen had appliances that hummed quietly, and cupboards that closed with a silent, satisfying sigh. There was no crown moulding, no scuff marks on the walls, no character. It was perfect. She bought new furniture. A simple, comfortable sofa in a shade of grey. A sleek dining table with only 2 chairs. A bed with a firm mattress. She owned nothing that had been in the old house. Every object was new, untainted by memory. The first night she sat on the sofa and watched the city lights glitter below. The silence here was different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the old house. It was a clean, expansive silence. It wasn't an absence of sound. It was the presence of peace. For years, her life had been defined by the needs of others. Robert's illness, Jacob's endless crises. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was now the loudest thing in her life. She had unburdened herself. She had shed the skin of her old life, the identity of wife-mother and silent keeper of secrets. She had walked out of the past and closed the door firmly behind her. Now there was only the future, a vast, unknown territory stretching out before her, visible from the 12th floor window of her new empty life. The silence was no longer something to be endured. It was something to be savoured. A few months after the move, a package arrived. It was a small, unassuming brown box with a handwritten address label. The return address was from a distant cousin in Oregon, one of the few who had called in the weeks after the party. Not to gossip, but just to ask, "Are you okay?" Elizabeth placed the box on her new, uncluttered kitchen island. She ran her finger over the tape, a sense of hesitation holding her back. She had worked so hard to purge the past, to live in the sterile present. She wasn't sure she was ready for a relic to find its way back to her. Finally, she slit the tape with a paring knife. Inside, nestled in a bed of tissue paper, was a small velvet ring box. Not the original, but one just like it. Her breath caught in her throat. With trembling fingers, she opened it. There it was, Robert's wedding band. The simple, worn gold ring. The cousin had tracked it down. He had gone to the pawn shop in that other town and bought it back. There was no note of explanation. None was needed. It was an act of quiet redemption, a small gesture to mend a tear in the fabric of their shattered family. She picked it up. It felt heavy, heavier than it should. It was a symbol of so much. 52 years of love and partnership. A decade of secret sacrifice. A final ugly betrayal. She didn't slip it onto her finger. Instead, she carried it into the bedroom and placed it on the nightstand beside her bed. It was a part of her story, a part of Robert's. It no longer needed to be a shackle. It could just be a memory understood and put in its proper place. Tucked beneath the ring box was a letter. The handwriting was young, a little shaky. It was from Mia. Elizabeth sat on the edge of her bed, the crisp sheets cool against her legs, and unfolded the single piece of paper. "Grandma," it began, "I don't really know how to start this. Things have been a mess. I moved out. I'm staying with my friend Jessica for now. Her parents have been really kind. I got a job at a coffee shop. It's not much, but it's mine. I started therapy. We do it online through an app. It feels weird talking to a stranger on a screen, but she's helping. She said what happened wasn't my fault. I know that sounds obvious, but I needed to hear it. For a long time, I felt like I was the price, like I was the thing that got broken. My parents, I haven't spoken to them. They've tried to call. They sent these long, crazy texts. Dad said he was protecting me. Mom said you manipulated everyone. I blocked their numbers. The therapist said it was okay to do that. She said, I have to save myself first. That's what I wanted to thank you for. I know what you did was hard. I know you blew up our whole world. But you didn't just expose a lie, Grandma. You gave me the truth. You showed me what they were, and in a weird way that set me free. For my whole life, I felt like I had to be perfect to make up for something. I never knew what. Now I do. You gave me permission to stop trying. You gave me permission to save myself. I hope you're okay. I'll call soon when I feel a little more steady. Love, Mia." Elizabeth folded the letter and placed it next to the ring on the nightstand. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of a deep, aching relief. She had lost a son, yes. She had dismantled a family. But she had saved her granddaughter. In freeing herself, she had freed Mia too. The cost had been immense, but it was not without value. She walked to the sliding glass door and stepped out onto the balcony. The air was cool and clean, the sky to the east, just beginning to bleed with the soft colours of dawn. The city below was still mostly asleep, a grid of quiet streets and dark windows. She leaned against the railing, feeling the cold steel under her hands. For 52 years, her life had been a series of duties, of obligations, of roles she was expected to play. Wife, mother, caregiver, widow. Her world had been the four walls of that house, the needs of the men she loved. Now she was just Elizabeth. She had no one to answer to. No meals to cook. No secrets to keep. No quiet disappointments to swallow. The path ahead was not a well-worn track, but a blank page. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The sun broke over the horizon, casting long shadows across the city and painting the glass of her new home in hues of orange and pink. She watched it rise, feeling the cool morning air on her face, on her arms, on the skin of a life that was now entirely her own. She had walked through fire and had not been consumed. For the first time in more than half a century, she felt completely, terrifyingly, and gloriously free.